say no to the sending naughty boys out of class ban. No sooner is my say no to the shouting ban video uploaded, we've got another issue virtually identical. The structure's the same, but the content is different. So this is a new bill in the Scottish Parliament being proposed by the Labour MSP Daniel Johnson. I'll read a little bit of what he's said about it. It says, children have a right to an education, and we collectively have an obligation to ensure that every child has the opportunity to learn. Sadly, for many children, especially those with additional support needs, this isn't the case. Right, we can clarify what Daniel means here, because what he's actually said is basically children have a right to an education, but sometimes this isn't the case. In other words, sometimes they don't have a right to an education. Now, he's obviously hasn't expressed himself very clearly. He doesn't mean that. What he means is this right is not being fulfilled in some cases. So he says, for these children, the use of restraint and seclusion is a regular part of their experience at school, including the use of prone and stress holds, being placed in restraining chairs, being put in so-called chill-out spaces that are little more than a cupboard, and being put in a chair and desk in the hallway. And the basic drift of the bill is basically wants to restrict all of these practices to make them, to raise the bar for the conditions that have to be met to use them, and then make it more onerous, the fact you have to report it and take various steps if you do actually have to resort to one of these measures, which is hoping to absolutely minimise their use. So let's have a look at what he means by it. So restraint, I would define restraint as using physical force to stop someone or to make someone do something or to move them or whatever, using physical strength. And Daniel Johnson says he wants this only to be used in order to avert an immediate threat of physical harm or injury to the pupil or other pupils or staff. So immediate physical harm or injury is to be the criteria. Now, regulating restraint is a very difficult thing to do if you think about it. There's all sorts of factors, so it's a difficult area with lots of complex issues to address. But as far as Daniel Johnson's concerned, it really is a one-way street. There's going to be less of it, and less of it, and then less of it again. Absolutely minimised. That's the way he's got to be pushing. Now, let's think about a few situations there. Let's say you've got you're a teacher, you've got a class of 5-year-olds on a school trip in a different city, and one of them says, right, I'm going to go home myself, and starts wandering off from the group. And you say, you can't do that, no, you've got to stay with us. So go, no, I'm going. What you do? Well, I would suggest what the teacher should do is grab that child by the arm and say, you can't go, you've got to stay with us. Now, would they be able to do that according to Daniel Johnson? Is there an immediate threat of injury or harm? Well, I would suggest not, but I think this teacher should be able to grab the child by the arm and say, no, you're not going. How about the common situation in classrooms in Scotland where a young pupil, let's say a young boy, is just going absolutely berserk, trashing the classroom, smashing up furniture, throwing equipment around the room. Should someone come along, a couple of men come along and say, we're not having this, and actually stop him from doing it? And that doesn't happen at the moment. The class will be evacuated and the pupil will trash the classroom until he's bored or until there's nothing left to break. How about a stroppy teenager blocking the door of a classroom, not letting the teacher out? What can the teacher do? They can phone and get support, but then people will come and talk to the teenager. The teenager might just say, I'm not moving. And the teenager will stay there blocking the door until they decide they've had enough, they've had their fun, they've made their point, and they'll then saunter off and the teacher can leave the classroom. Is that what should happen? Or should a couple of men come along and say, right, we're not having this, you're going to move now, and move the teenager. But what about a really naughty, again, let's have naughty boys, let's face it, there's more of those than naughty girls in these sort of ways. So naughty boy in the lesson, and the teacher tries to remove them, saying, you've got to leave the class, you've got to go to such and such a place, and the boy says, no, I'm not going. Then what should happen then? Well, I believe it would be quite appropriate for a couple of men to come along and say, you've got to leave. Okay, it's not up to you, you've got to go, and if you're not going to come quietly, then we're going to remove you physically. Now, okay, there's lots of grey areas here. You want to avoid staff ending up in a fight with pupils. There needs to be overwhelming physical superiority for this sort of thing. I think in special schools, what I've described there the two men come along and take a pupil away, that would happen quite routinely, but not anymore. Not anymore. The teacher just has to put up with the person, put up with the abuse they're getting, because there's really nothing they can do. So Daniel Johnson's bill here, it will weaken teachers, embolden children. Teachers will be increasingly powerless. And remember, he's doing this in the name of children's rights. So under the banner of promoting children's rights, he will make schools less orderly and less safe, more dangerous and more out of control. That does not enhance children's experience. For teachers, it's a nightmare because increasingly they can't assert their will on the children. Now, always remember, whatever these ideologues are proposing for professionals, that they're really the same standards they'd like to impose on parents as well. And that normally comes a bit later, but it will come eventually. I remember, I've heard that apparently in Norway, if your toddler says they don't want to go shopping, and you say, well, we're going shopping now, and you pick them up and you put them in the car seat and strap them in, then that would be illegal. And in some cases in Norway, if toddler says they don't want to go, you don't go. You don't go. Anyway, that's restraint. Let's go on to seclusion. This is the more important part. So it talks about children being put in chill-out spaces. Now this, if you haven't been in a school in recent years, you might not know what these are. But it might be, a room with a few bean bags and an Xbox, where if a pupil is outrageously badly behaved, they get sent there just to cool down, to calm down a little bit. If they're very, very careful, it's not a punishment. It's just there to diffuse the situation and let the person just collect themselves, and so they can then go back to class. Now, as a response to bad behaviour, it is absolutely pathetic, weak and feeble, and the pupil involved thinks, hey, I'm getting away with this. All the other pupils thinking he or she is getting away with it, and that's what happens. That's what happens. Now, for Daniel Johnson, he really wants to put that under the microscope because he thinks it infringes children's rights. He really wants to put the pressure on because he's very concerned that pupils have been sent to chill-out spaces. He refers to some of them being little more than a cupboard. Really, I find that hard to believe. I think what he might mean is some of them are quite a small room. But the result of this legislation, if God forbid it actually passes, will be teachers will be increasingly afraid to use the chill-out room, to send a naughty pupil to the chill-out room. Are pupils scared of misbehaving? In many cases, not in the slightest. Are staff scared of doing anything at all in response? Yes. You can't punish them, you can't tell them off, you can't raise your voice. At least you can send them to the chill-out room. Oh, maybe even that is going to be, that's a bit risky. There might be problems. It might be frowned upon if you send a child to the chill-out room. Now let's get to the sting in the tail. This is where the extrapolation goes wild. And Daniel Johnson talks about being put in a chair and desk in the hallway. So in other words, you've got, let's say, naughty boy in your chemistry lesson, behaving very, very badly, destroying the lesson, winding the teacher up, annoying the other pupils, learning reduced to 0. And the teacher says, right, I've had enough, I've warned you and warned you. Come and sit here, it's outside the classroom, here's some work to do, then I can get on with the lesson, and that's that. So the teacher can get on with the lesson, the other children can actually learn something, and the boy who was behaving badly, he loses his audience that he was playing up to, and the situation is solved. The lesson can go on. There's the issue of how's he supervised, what's he going to get up to out there, but that's a separate issue. Now, I was hearing a story quite recently from an Edinburgh teacher, and she said to a boy who was behaving very, very badly, right, you will leave the lesson, you could go out and work here or whatever. And the boy said, you can't do that, I've got a right to education. And Daniel Johnson, if he was there, he would say, you're quite right, son. Don't you let that teacher send you out. You've got a right to education. Now, through my teaching career, for the vast majority of it, sending a pupil out to work in another area or whatever was perfectly routine. Perfectly routine. But towards the end, it became controversial. And increasingly that was seen as something that was just a step too far. That was infringing the right to education or whatever. Now, actually, in fact, is it acceptable to send out a naughty boy from class to make him do his work somewhere else? Of course it is. Of course it is. But these pressures, the direction of travel, it's always disempowering teachers, because there's the idea that sending a naughty boy out of class in some way infringes his rights. So again, Daniel Johnson thinks he's helping children, thinks he's protecting them from adults. In other words, these adults, these teachers, who are devoting their careers, their vocation, to look after these children, to educate them, to care for them, to nurture them, Daniel Johnson thinks the children need protecting from them. In other words, that the assumption is these adults, these teachers, they're really bullies that the children need protecting from. It's a really bizarre view of the world. So he thinks he's helping children, but he's not. Because this bill, if it passes, will result in yet further deterioration of discipline in schools. And that's very bad news for teachers. And it's even worse news for children. And the same philosophy eventually will be enforced on parents. And that will be further bad news. Now I thought, I've done the video, say no to the shouting ban, say no to the sending naughty boys out of class ban. I thought, what's going to be next? I thought maybe confiscation. So you've got a kid playing a game on their phone in class, and the teacher takes their phone off them. And someone could say, oh, you're infringing their rights, that's stealing. But then I was thinking that to myself. I thought, well, hang on a minute. That is what was starting to happen. While I was teaching, the idea of confiscating things, it was increasingly coming under pressure, and the message coming through was becoming, you're not allowed to do that. You haven't got the right to do that. Yet another example. Now, just on the issue of restraint, I thought I'd finish by just telling a little story from a few years ago. I was walking along Morningside High Street in Edinburgh. The street was quite busy, and a little girl, I would guess she would be maybe 3, I could see her running towards me along the footpath, and she was absolutely distraught, crying, and she was running at full pelt along the footpath. She was going through lots of people. Lots of people were looking at her, but no one did anything. And I saw this girl running. I thought, the next road she gets to, she's running straight out into it. So I need to stop her. So I grabbed her by the arm as gently as I could, but still stopping her, making her stop. And I crouched down and said to her, what's wrong? She said, I've lost my mum, I've lost my mum. I said, okay, well, why don't we just wait here? I'm sure your mum will be along in just a little while. You just wait here, and it'll all be okay. Then I thought to myself, this might not be the best look. A bloke grabbing this little girl and she's crying and you don't know him or whatever. You don't know her. So I spoke to a lady walking past. I said, this little girl's lost her mum. I'm just waiting here with her. Would you mind just waiting with me for a little while? So I think she quite understood. She said, yes, I'll wait with you. So that was fine. So we waited with this little girl. It was only a few minutes later. It wasn't long. The mum came along, and the mum was in an absolute panic as well. So she came along, picked the girl up, gave her a hug, and went, completely forgetting to say thank you to myself and this lady. So the lady and myself said thanks to each other, and off we went. If Daniel Johnson had his way, would that have been okay? Maybe just about. Just about. Okay, right, do get your tickets for the Scottish Family Party Conference, 11th of November in Glasgow in the afternoon. Non-members welcome. You can get your tickets via the link below. We would love to see you there. Thanks for watching.